necessarily unproblematic expansion of renewable energy in the Baltic Sea and the Baltic Sea region, but most notably in this case, the sea-based wind energy production. Well, like I said, not necessarily unproblematic expansion, but not necessarily problematic either. But in light of that, CCB and WWF networks of NGOs in the Baltic region have created a sort of a set of guidelines for how we feel that a future with offshore renewable establishments should sort of look like. And this is what we are talking about today. So we have a number of participants that are listening in. Of course, there will be a little discussion after a presentation of these guidelines, said guidelines. There is a possibility for you to ask questions. There is a Q&A button that you can use. We cannot promise you that we will answer all of them, but we will try to filter them and package them so they become sort of sets of questions that are sort of similar. So please feel free to do that. Obviously, you can specifically name or ask a specific question to a participant, and also to the speaker first, which is Andrea presenting the guidelines. So we have with us first Andrea Cervantes from CCB, who will present the paper that's been produced together with CCB and WWF. After that, we will have a conversation with representatives from the sort of a government perspective, an industry perspective, and a science perspective. And on top of that, of course, the NGO perspective will be presented first. So that's how we plan the day and the morning, I was going to say, the day, that's up to you. And I will, without any further additions to that, give the floor to Andrea to open this webinar with presenting the sort of short draft outline or outline, I would say, of these guidelines. So, and after that, Johanna Fox from WWF will take over for her. Andrea, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Niels, and good morning, everyone. I'll try to share my screen now. Can you see it full presentation? Okay, great. Thank you. I'm a bit sick, so I apologize if I interrupt a bit the session. But my name is Andrea Cervantes, and I work as a biodiversity officer at CCB. And I will present the guidelines that we Coalition Clean Baltic and WWF Baltic Ecoregion Programme have developed for planning offshore renewable energy in the Baltic Sea. But first, I wanted to mention that the Baltic Sea is an already heavily occupied area with several maritime activities taking place and using resources in the region. So now we face a massive introduction of offshore wind energy, and we will have to address compatibility issues, conflicts of interest, as well as to find opportunities for coexistence all throughout strategic planning. And just to give a bit of a background, as you may know, in May 2022, the REPowerEU plan and the proposal for the amendment of the Renewable Energy Directive were introduced, aiming for a massive speed up and scale up in renewable energy in order to achieve energy independence and security, as well as to work towards decarbonization. So the target has been agreed for the share from renewable energy sources to a total of 45% to 2030, and member states need to identify areas for renewable energy, so-called go-to areas, or nowadays acceleration areas. So as a consequence to this, the Marienborg Declaration was signed also last year, where Baltic member states have sevenfolded their ambitions for offshore wind energy installed capacity to at least 19.6 gigabytes to 2030. And recently, the Berlin Declaration was signed this month, where the member states have signed for commitments in terms of cooperation and coordination, as well as to strengthen financing instruments. So the purpose of these guidelines that we have developed is to inform a region-wide discussion and to be used as a signpost for decision-making processes linked to identifying and designating areas for offshore renewable energy without negatively affecting nature and allowing the acceleration of nature protection and restoration. So we have developed a framework with 5 main considerations for this process, and these are legislative, environmental, spatial, technical and technological, and socioeconomic considerations. And we have also developed a decision tree with the most relevant questions that are aligned to the framework I just presented to reach to what we consider should be no-go areas, might-go areas, and go-to areas. So in CCB's and WWF BEP's view on the legislative side, the planning, identifying and designating process for these areas should align climate, energy and nature marine legislation and neither weaken or nor overlook environmental requirements if climate, energy and protection and restoration targets are to be met. On the environmental side, we have added areas for avoidance, mainly for marine protection and key biodiversity sites for red listed and migratory species. And we have added considerations to address uncertainty and lack of data regarding cumulative impacts. So we also see the need to carry out both regional and site-specific environmental assessments in order to introduce mitigation or proper mitigation measures where a funding mechanism can be linked to permitting processes in order to address monitoring as well as the knowledge gaps that exist nowadays. And for the spatial considerations, member states should integrate and harmonize the maritime spatial plans, reaching to a transnational planning where data can be standardized and open for everyone. On the technical and technological side, the chosen areas and technologies should ensure safety and suitability, and member states should explore alternatives for cooperation through common projects, for example, hybrid projects or mesh grids, in order to reduce or minimize the pressure when it comes to costs, supply chain, and spatial needs. And last but not least, in terms of socioeconomic considerations, if there has been already 2 joint declarations, there must be joint actions that are carried out in a transnational and cross-sectoral way where conflict resolution mechanisms are implemented and early stakeholder engagement is ensured. So as our final notes as key recommendations, centralized digital MSP portals, both regional and national, should be improved, and working together across industry to adhere to existing marine legislation is vital to reach energy, climate and environmental targets. We also see that the formation of a dedicated Baltic Marine stakeholder platform hub could be beneficial for exchanging experiences, challenges, as well as to find synergies among actors. And even though the offshore renewable energy expansion will happen and is needed, we also need to focus simultaneously on energy savings, repowering and efficient use of energy, as well as to enforce the polluter pays principle for environmental damage, which should not only be for the offshore renewable energy sector, but for all maritime activities in the Baltic Sea. So finally, 3 main points that we would like to communicate and that will give the introduction to this panel is that even when offshore wind energy is vital for achieving energy independence, energy security, and to reach decarbonization, we cannot do this at the expense of nature. So we need to allow also marine protection and restoration of our Baltic marine ecosystems, and also we need to address challenges in terms of cumulative impacts, maybe by implementing these biodiversity funding mechanisms linked to permitting processes. So transnational and cross-sectoral cooperation are then key to achieve offshore renewable energy development with nature in mind. Thank you, and I will give the floor now to Johanna and the panelists.
Thank you, Andrea, for that interesting presentation. And to all of you listening, my name is Johanna Fox, and I'm the director for WWF Baltic Programme, and I will be guiding this discussion with our panelists for the rest of the webinar. And just to recap, you can ask questions using the Q&A button, and we'll see if we will have time to address them during the panel discussion. But with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. And we have Dr. Kai Trümple, who is the head of Spatial Planning Division at the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency in Germany, who is responsible for the marine spatial plans in the German EEZ. We also have Lena Bergström with us, who is an associate professor at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and she's the head of the ecosystem analysis at SLU Aqua. Has experience and is doing a lot of research on the impact on marine environment from offshore wind development. And lastly, we have Lasma Livsiniece, who is the executive director at the Latvian Wind Energy Association and has over a decade experience working with the wind energy sector from Brussels and now back in Latvia. Welcome, everyone. And like we heard, we in the Baltic Sea have now a political ambition of increasing the offshore renewable energy with 7-folds in only 7 years' time. Now, this is quite a task to achieve. And from our side, from WWF and CCB, obviously, we are concerned with how this will be done in a way that it doesn't harm the Baltic Sea, which is a crowded sea and also a sea in not such a healthy state. So I would like to open this panel discussion by asking you, and I start with you, Kai, what are the key challenges that you see that we need to address in order to successfully deliver on this ambitious target without harming the Baltic Sea nature?
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everyone. And first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this discussion, and also thank you for taking the initiative of writing these guidelines and making them public. From the planning point of view, we have to see that we are at a point where we all have already implemented our first round of maritime spatial planning, in some instances, the second round of maritime spatial planning. And so I think that is already a solid basis for future planning decisions that we have. So if we just implement what has been done in already existing maritime spatial planning, I think we can be fairly safe that this will be in line with regulations and environmental necessities, right? Because it's been part of a process that is very akin to what you have outlined in your guidelines. And when you come to what is on top, you know, or if there is anything on top, I mean, as you say, the Baltic Sea is a crowded space, but we should not fall for the fallacy, if I may say that, to be like the drunken person who looks under the light post for his keys just because there's light. You know, it still is going to be that the biggest challenges for the Baltic Sea are going to be eutrophication and overfishing, and not necessarily offshore wind. You know, so we should be careful, but we should not really ascribe all the woes that are going to come to the Baltic Sea just to offshore wind.
Thank you. And before I continue to our other panelists, I would just like to ask you, Kai, here, you say from a German perspective, you already have the plans, you might be able to meet these targets and what has been planned. In the Baltic Sea region, we do see that there are differences between the various countries. Some are replanning their MSPs, others need to really get going on the offshore wind development. And so there's different levels in the various countries. Various countries have different permitting processes, different processes for MSPs. Do you see that there's a need for coherence between the countries? And how can we solve this planning across the Baltic Sea? Because the Baltic Sea itself doesn't see any borders.
Yes, that's very true. And thank you for giving the opportunity on commenting on this. We are in very close cooperation with all the planning authorities across the Baltic, which are EU member states, in the HELCOM-WASAP Maritime Spatial Planning Forum and the Planners Forum that is connected to that. And as a part of the initiatives that we as Germany have taken over the years with different projects that were sponsored by the European Union, we are also able to set up a portal at the at HELCOM, which already combines all the existing maritime spatial plans and is open to everyone. Is the Basemaps portal, which you are aware of, and we are continuously working on making more data accessible across the Baltic through this, from a planner's perspective, but also, of course, HELCOM as an organization on the on the input data, if you will, so what is the actual data that the planning is based on. So yes, and again, part of the integral part of maritime spatial planning is, of course, being cross-border with your neighbors, but also further reaching. And we are also always in very close cooperation with our neighbors when we draw up maritime spatial plans.
Thank you. Lasma, from an industry perspective, what are the challenges that you see in reaching these targets we have for the Baltic Sea? And what are your thoughts in terms of the cross-border collaboration across the countries in the Baltic Sea?
Thank you also for inviting me, first of all, to join this webinar. And yes, I think, well, coordination is always good and needed so that we are all on the same page, that everybody knows what's happening in the neighborhood, so we can plan better when it comes to be it grid, be it, vessels that are needed or the planning process itself. But I don't know if it's a good or bad news, but well, the industry, the sort of the excitement and hype has diminished slightly nowadays because of well, the material costs have gone up now. Some estimate that even plus 50%. There are huge delays in the supply chain. So I'm a bit pessimistic towards this goal, or rather the deadline, where we say that by 2030 there would be 19.5 gigawatts added. I think this would be delayed slightly, but it's coming, and maybe this also gives us the chance to plan it better, to have certain things ready before we actually, kick off with the construction of offshore wind farms.
And when you say plan it better, and we have a little bit of time, how can we plan it from an industry perspective better so that we take environmental considerations into concern? Well,
it was already mentioned, aligning the maritime spatial plans, getting the legislations more or less similar, creating some sort of, putting the environment in the focus here, in the center, thinking how we all can contribute to improving the ecosystem in the Baltic Sea. And there are plenty of options to do that. So one way is to work it in the auctioning, in the tendering rules. We have previously talked about maybe setting up a fund where developers can chip in with their, profit sharing mechanisms, or maybe it should be up to the states to establish these funds. And, there are tens and tens of possibilities to work in, certain mechanisms, how we can improve the Baltic Sea condition.
Thank you, Lasma. We'll come back to that, the thoughts around the fund here, because that's an interesting one. But I would like to turn to Lena now to hear a little bit from the science perspective. How much do we know about the potential impacts of offshore wind in the Baltic Sea, and where are there challenges and research gaps that needs to be addressed in order to meet these targets in a way that we don't harm nature?
Thank you also from my side for having me here in this panel discussion. It's much appreciated to be able also to listen in on the perspectives from the planning and the industry in the same. I would like to respond to the question, excuse me. There is actually quite a bit of information available already on how offshore wind farm may affect nature, because there has been research being done in other countries where they already have had offshore wind experiences and carried out processes or surveys to see how that would have affected the environment. The problem is obviously that these studies have not been carried out in the Baltic Sea. So they are, for example, from North Sea, from Scotland, and from the States and other countries. So you can see for some species that are also occurring there, you can see how they reacted in those environments, and you can, based on that, you can make assumptions on how species, same species or types of species could respond in the Baltic Sea. But there is still a main challenge to develop these insights and understand how, in more detail, could these hypotheses about how the environment would respond and verify that from the Baltic Sea perspective to see that we are making the correct assumptions in this case. So if that's so in one way we do have a lot of information, and on the other side we do not have the local specific information. So that is part of the uncertainty that we have to deal with in making these decisions, and seeing, like, if you have something that's associated with a risk and there's a low certainty, maybe you need to have stronger awareness of that particular aspect. However, if you have a aspect that is associated with a low risk, but it's a low certainty, so that helps you decide on the risk scale where to put in your efforts also, and that could be guiding also from the planning process to see how it works. If I may, I was also interesting to these comments from the state of planning, and that's very good, obviously, that there are marine spatial plans coming up in countries. They are, of course, very different we also heard that they're very different in how the legislation is aligned and how the actual permitting processes are being carried out. And there's also relating to a knowledge gap, in my opinion, that I hear a lot from people who are involved in different steps of this decision-making process. For example, from the very local level specifically, where many people feel a very heavy burden of responsibility in making these important decisions currently. And there's a lot of people who have to consider these plans because many are potentially affected, and also to share the existing knowledge to these lines of the decision process would be very important as well, so that the knowledge is not only within the key responsibilities, but it's actually a feature that affects many. So there's also many who need to be aware of these aspects that are, and the knowledge that is being developed.
And how do you see what is the knowledge that we need to develop? You say that we have some knowledge, but then we're lacking the local knowledge in the Baltic Sea, and we also need to create more availability to the knowledge that we do have at the various levels. Now, to follow up on that, I mean, if we couple this to the targets that we see for the Baltic Sea, we also have the Repower EU plan that calls for a faster permitting process, as well as the possibility to override public interest and not to conduct as thorough environmental impact assessments. Do you see any risks with this from an environmental but also another like socioeconomic stakeholder perspective, Lena?
I am assuming that this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I am assuming that these reduced requirements refer not to reduced environmental concern, because that would not be advisable. So it's more about the process. Obviously, it's not advisable to reduce the level of requirements for environmental impact assessment as such. However, there could be possibilities to look into how that process could be streamlined to reduce the time that is needed in actually putting all these decisions together. For example, by advancing the basic knowledge that is available from start to the decision makers, so that they don't have to individually find out the same information, as is currently unfortunately the case in many cases, and also to coordinate the decision processes would be more effective in that way. Making sacrifices for in certain cases is obviously not advisable.
Thank you. And Lasma, from an industry perspective, Lena was talking about we need to streamline our permitting processes, but not reduce environmental requirements. What are your thoughts from this industry? What is the key to make permitting processes faster?
We are there with you. Any wind farm development should not be done at the expense of our environment. I mean, we as the industry see this as one of the top priorities when planning offshore wind farms. But I mean, as for Latvia, it's very difficult to talk about the specifics because there are no specifics. We're at this point still kind of working out our tendering rules, so nobody has gone through the permitting process yet. But when it comes, I can give you an example from the onshore planning. So there has been attempts on the governmental level to sort of kind of, reduce the process by eliminating certain parts of the environment impact assessment, which we completely oppose because it's not aligned with our values, and we don't see the for example, the environment impact assessment as being the longest process in all of this. There are like bits and pieces where you can optimize the procedure before and afterwards, but there are certain things, certain procedures and certain steps you have to go through when evaluating where and how the wind farm can be built. So we as the industry definitely want to keep all the needed procedures for the environment impact assessment, because it's not only for the environment, but it's also a reputation for the project. Nobody wants to end up, having to dismantle their offshore wind farm or onshore wind farm, after a while, or nobody wants to get their turbines linked to any court cases. So it's straight up there. So.
So if I understand correctly, environmental impact assessments and that part of the permitting process is still a very much a requirement from the industry side, or from your perspective, and perhaps
Absolutely.
Not what's causing the delay in permitting processes.
No.
So if I might turn to you, Kai, are you sharing this view from your perspective in terms of the planning?
I mean, I can only really in-depth speak for the German example, and we have a multi-tiered planning approach. So we have a maritime spatial plan with an SEA that is followed by the sectoral offshore wind plan, the site development plan, which is also has an SEA, which is then followed by a site suitability assessment, site-specific, which is also an SEA. And then at the end, you have an EIA for the specific project. And so given that, I think it is fair to ask, is there actually new information added at every step, And given the urgency that, we see in Germany to make every exertion possible to reach the goals that we have stipulated and to reach the 1.5 degree goal, can there be something done like Lena has said on the process? Do we really need all these steps? So I can see that there's some possibility for enhancement there.
All right. Perfect. Streamlining the steps in the permitting processes, but perhaps not reducing environmental requirements. Just Kai, touching upon what Lena was saying in terms of making this, the knowledge that we do have, making it available at all various levels. How is that from a German perspective? Do you find that the various stakeholders and the authorities that are part of the permitting processes and the planning, is the data available to everyone there, and is it streamlined?
I try to answer this briefly. It's a very complicated question, given the different systems we had over the years in Germany. Some of this data was for a long time considered to be a proprietary data because it could possibly give a competitor an edge. So there were issues with access to data, which we're trying to remove and to align more with the process that we have and make these more freely available. It's also a capacity issue. We have a lot of data from continuous monitoring, which also includes wind farms in the Baltic, where there's just like very little capacity to actually look into the data in detail. We're talking about gigabytes in gigabytes of raw data. But we're working on this too. And to make this, to enable a continuous monitoring, one of the new provisions in the German law is that there should be a 10-year continuous monitoring of every wind farm that's put in place. And the monitoring should be done according to the standard that is developed by the agency I work for. So there should be at least a continuous monitoring once the wind farm is in place. And we do really hope to learn a little more about the wind farms that we had already in place, including the ones in the Baltic, and make this available.
And how now linking this to a little bit of touching upon what Lasma brought up earlier, like a need for a fund or a mechanism that can pay for everything from monitoring to data collection to perhaps even restoration actions needed. We have the issue of, we have a lot of data. This was something that came up. So prior to WWF and CCB developing these guidelines, we had a discussion with the industry, the offshore wind industry around the Baltic Sea. And we also learned that there are a lot of data available. Just like you were mentioning here, Kai, there's a need to collect this data, but there's also a need to standardize the data across the Baltic Sea so that it can be shared in a wider planning process. Who should pay for the monitoring, the data collection, the assessments? Should that be something that's in the power of the states, or is this something that offshore wind companies should be part of paying for in a permitting process? And it's interesting to hear how you deal with this in Germany.
Well, as I said, in Germany, the wind farm developer has to collect data before the application for the initial assessment of the wind farm, and then during operation, according to the standard that's prescribed by the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency, and then has to deliver this data to us. So, and we in turn also share this with the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. And as I said, we do hope to make this more widely available to interested public parties. Yes, so I do think the collection should definitely be the responsible of the wind farm owner. It's also easiest in terms of logistical issues. If you think about, if measurement devices are supposed to be attached to piles and so on. But then the data should be made widely available, and really, as far as safety allows, to almost everyone who is interested in this. We are not there yet, and also, as you said, this also requires the data to be analyzed, which quite sophisticated models in sometimes, and it is also very expensive. And the question is, who should pay for that? And I really don't have a good answer, because then the question, who should pay for that? You can easily say it's the wind farm operator, but then who should they pay the money to analyze this? You know, they can't like pay everyone who wants to be analyzed. You know, they who wants to analyze this. Should they give it to Helcom? Should they give it to the national state? You know, it is really, as of now, it is incumbent upon whoever wants to analyze the data to analyze it according to their best ability.
Lena, do you see any issues with the data availability, and then who should analyze this data and who should collect this data?
I think it is very interesting to look in these possibilities for co-funding solutions, so that organizations who have a step in it, companies and organizations that have a stake in it could pull in efforts together and potential processes to look into that. And that could be potentially a way of dealing this. It's very interesting to hear about how it seems to be set up in a standard as well that could work also. So for inspiration, how we just heard from how it works in Germany with the data collection side, and see into those parts. And that's interesting to see more about how that could work. And also, but then obviously this is international interest with those data. So it could also be a case for looking into if whatever works in one country, is that a suitable standard for another country. So that's obviously a question that will come up. Then it's also interesting to hear about these capacity issues also for dealing with the data that is coming in and publishing it or analyzing it and making it available. And that could be also potentially solved by this co-funding system that would take headspace for those like are more like shared needs that are potentially outside of the remit of a particular project, but still there's just like a shared interest in having it developed long term.
Thank you. And just a quick one before we're going to swap over to a slightly different topic here. But Lasma, from the industry side, you like you mentioned previously, you would be okay with this type of funding mechanism, being part of sharing the funding for this type of monitoring and data collection?
Yes, in general, sure. I think everybody understands that, well, data is a very powerful tool, and it's needed to be used. Well, for the monitoring part is something that I totally agree. It should be done. The data should be made public. I think the developers would be okay to share their profit towards creating this data pool, standardized pool, but it should not be only up to the developers, because we need to. It's also the interest of the state, of the country, to first of all fulfill their environmental goals, but also to ensure that the consumers get cheaper electricity. But then something that I'm thinking about in this very first phase or this data collection before you install a wind farm. So I think when it comes to creating these offshore tenders and how we get to actually building the wind farms, this is a tricky part where I can give you the bad example of the Netherlands, where one site can be scoped and site studied by many developers, and it just it maximizes the impact on the environment. So how can we make sure that the first investor developer who does the scoping, the seabed surveys, technical studies, how can we get them to share their data so that the next one can already build their research based on the data that's done by somebody else? And of course it's a very tricky question, because me as a developer, I am investing money, huge amounts of money, to do these site investigations and studies. So that's something where I don't have an answer to, but I can see that it's a problem.
Yeah. Thank you. We need better data sharing there, making it easier also from a developer side. Just one. We have a couple of minutes left, but one key topic here that one that we view strongly from WWF and CCB side is the need to, well, we see an acceleration in offshore wind development, but we also need to have an acceleration in nature protection and restoration. And we're not even close to meeting our goals for protected areas in the Baltic Sea, and the protected areas that we have might not have the most stringent protections regimes. And now what are the risks associated with placing large infrastructure projects such as offshore wind farms in marine protected areas that we do see some plans pointing towards? Lena, what do we know about that from a science perspective?
Yes, I think the risk is tightly linked, obviously, to the management objective of the MPA that you have, because you could have MPAs set with different objectives in mind. And obviously, if an intrusion into a marine protected area is something that would then risk the possibilities for reaching that particular management objective, which is quite often the case, then it's not advisable. The reason that I'm taking so much long time to say this is that there are exceptions, of course, because this is where I think maritime spatial planning comes in as a very important player, and the importance of also having environmental impact assessment on the plans as such, because that's about the only way where you can look at this displacements effect and see what happens to those other sea uses at sea, some of which are going to be excluded from the MPA area, and others are going to be excluded from the wind farm area. I'm looking at fishing. And then these fishermen are not going to go anywhere. So, or they're not going to disappear, so they're going to fish somewhere else. And where would that be? And there could be scenarios where you have, in fact, a poorer environmental outcome in situation if you're very strict about avoiding MPAs at any cost without looking at these overall perspectives. So you really need to do these cumulative impact assessments from that perspective to see how so that you're absolutely aware of the scenarios that could appear. And obviously this could also, in some cases, it could be synergistic effect as well if you place an MPA. If you have an MPA and then you have offshore wind farms around it, that could also have a synergistic effect, but so that they strengthen each other in some scenarios. So there's no absolute yes or no, but you need to look into the overall planning situation.
Right. Thank you. We have 1 minute left of this webinar, and I would just like to wrap up a little bit of what we've heard today. What I take with me from listening to the discussion we have with our panelists is that, well, we have large political ambitions to increase offshore wind in the Baltic Sea, but we also have issues with, we have data, but not enough data, or there is a lot of data, but who is going to collate this and actually analyze it in a good way possible. As well as there's a need from an industry perspective, like to streamline processes in order to meet these targets. And in all of this, we have to do this with nature in mind. That is crucial. And what I take home, and correct me, the panelists if I'm wrong, but we see it from CCB and WWF side that this needs to be done in a stepwise fashion. If we're going to do it in the Baltic Sea now, we have to do it right from the beginning and perhaps not rush, but actually do it stepwise so that we can understand the impacts on nature while also and minimize those while meeting the targets for renewable energy in the Baltic Sea. So with that, I would like to thank you all for an interesting webinar, and wish you a good day.